Good afternoon, I'm Ashley Kinzer. We're going to look at the 7th grade science CRCT data overview for 2011 through 2015. The attended audience is 7th grade science teachers and administrators at Dalton Middle School. The purpose of the data overview is to evaluate the achievement on the 7th grade science CRCT. It analyzes the trends over the past 5 years among the 7th grade students as a whole, among subgroups, and in comparison to the state scores. The purpose of the data overview is to find the strengths and the weaknesses. Once these strengths and weaknesses are revealed, then we can begin to think about the various instructional strategies to help close the achievement gaps evident from the data. I used two different sets of data when making this data overview. Georgia administrated the CRCT until 2014, and in 2015 they changed from the CRCT to the Georgia milestone. So I had to use data from 2011 to 2014 for the CRCT, and I used 1 year of data from the 2015 EOG. There are major changes in the format of the testing from the CRCT to the Georgia milestone for our math and literacy areas. The science area of the test stayed pretty much the same. The language of the test may have changed, but the standards assessed and the format stayed the same. So I'll be interested to see as we go through this data overview, do we see a difference between that 2011-2014 data and that 2015 data? This graphic is showing us the total population that took the CRCT from 2011 to 2015. We see that in 2011, there was 494 7th graders taking the science CRCT. We see an increase in 2012, a slight decrease in 2013, and then we see an increase in 2014 and 2015 at almost 90 more people taking the CRCT in 2015 than originally in 2011. This graphic is showing us the ethnicity of the students taking the 7th grade science CRCT in 2015. Of the 582 students taking the test, 4% of these were African American, 22% were white, 4% of them were 2 or more races, and the majority of the students taking the 7th grade science CRCT at Dalton Middle School is 70% Hispanic. So that's something that we see, that 70% of our students, majority of the students taking this test are Hispanic. This graphic is showing us a comparison between the subgroups versus the non-subgroups for 7th grade science CRCT meets and exceeds. Our first group is the students with disabilities. There was 57 students in this group. Of those 57 students, 19.4% were meeting and exceeding. 50.9% of the non-subgroup were meeting and exceeding. Our second group is English proficiency with 58 students. 12.1% were meeting and exceeding, where the non-subgroup had 51.8% meeting and exceeding. Our third group is the economically disadvantaged with 460 students. Of those 460 students, 40.7% were meeting and exceeding, where the non-subgroup had 74.6% meeting and exceeding. So just quickly looking at this graph, I can see that the subgroups always were having a lower percentage of meets and exceeds than the non-subgroup. So we need to start thinking of how can we meet the needs of these subgroups to help increase their percentage of meets and exceeds. This graphic is showing us the proficiency level for all subjects in 2015. So the red is does not meet, the yellow is meets, and the green is exceeds. I can quickly look at this graph and see that science has a higher percentage of students not meeting than the other three subjects. The meets is pretty close to the same, but still science has the lowest percentage of students meeting the science CRCT proficiency level. And then you see that the green is pretty much the same for all 4 of them, but still science is one of the lower ones along with ELA. And then we still have a very low percentage exceeding. So we would want to work on that and see how can we get more of our students from this does not meet to meets, and how these students that are meets could go to exceeds. This graphic is looking at the student proficiency level for science for 2011 through 2015. So we're just looking at science each school year from 2011, 2012, 13, 2014, and 2015. Once again, the red is does not meet, the yellow is meets, and the green is exceeds. Over all 5 years, you can see the first 4 years are relatively close, and then this 5th year, there was a major increase in the percentage of students that do not meet. Then the yellow, you see that all 5 years are relatively close at 53, 50, 47, and 45. That those are really close numbers. And then that the exceeds went from 2011 to 2014, all relatively close, around 28 to 30 something. But then in 2015, there was a major decrease in the amount of students exceeding. it went from 36.6% to 2.1% exceeding. Now, I need to think, this is the year that the test changed. So, is it the testing skills? Is it the content? Is it the instructional strategies? So this is where we want to start thinking, is there something that we can do differently to help better prepare our students for the 2015 EOGs, so the future EOGs, so 2016, 2017. So what needs to be done differently in the next year to increase this number to a higher number of meets and this number to a higher number of exceeds? This graph is comparing the school to the state in the does not meet area for 2011 through 2015. We see that DMS was lower than the state in 2011 and 2012, which is a good thing because we want less students not meeting. But then in 2013, 2014, and 2015, Dalton Middle School was higher in the does not meet percentage than the state. So we need to look back and think maybe what were we doing in 2011 and 2012 that had lower students not meeting than when 2013, 2014, and 2015. Once again, we see that the state and the school scores percentages had a lot more students not meeting in 2015 with the change of that test. So maybe more verification as to, to why we're seeing a decrease in their scores. Maybe the test has changed more than we thought. This graphic is showing us the school versus state in the meets proficiency level for 2011 to 2015. We see that Dalton Middle was above the state in meeting in 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014, but then in the 2015 school year, the state increased dramatically and actually outscored Dalton Middle School in the meets area. So the 4 years prior, Dalton Middle School was outscoring the state in meets, but then in 2015, with the change in the school year, the state outscored Dalton Middle School. So there are still obviously people that are having improvements in this new testing. So maybe we want to look at maybe other schools to see what instructional strategies they used, how they went from having a lower proficiency level to having a higher proficiency level within that new testing. So we need to see that we continue to decrease, but the state decreased and then actually increased with the new test. This graphic is showing us a comparison between the school and the state in exceeds. We can see that the state was actually had a higher percentage exceeding Dalton Middle School all 5 years. But we do notice that the state and Dalton Middle School both had an increase and then a major decrease in 2015. So we need to look and see how can we, get more students exceeding both our school and the state for 2015. Once again, this 1 year with the EOG, so is this data, really accurate? Is it, depicting a true statement? Do we need to look at it again in 2016 and 2017? Because 4 years of data here is showing us that there was an increase, slight decrease in one of the years, but then a major decrease in 2015. And we still need to work on getting more students to exceed anyway, because the state is actually outscoring us in the exceeds area than we are at our school. This graphic is showing us a combination of the meets and exceeds for the school versus the state. And we see that Dalton Middle School had more students meeting and exceeding in the 2011 and 2012 school year, but 2013 there dropped below the state, and then in 2014 there was a slight difference, but the state was still outweighing Dalton Middle School. And then in the 2015 school year, Dalton Middle School was still lower than the state at meeting and exceeding percentages. So we need to get this number up higher, but both still experienced a decrease in the meeting and exceeding. This graphic is looking at the cohort of 2015 7th grade students from 3rd grade to 7th grade. So the 2011 was this group's 3rd grade year, 2012 was the 4th graders, their 4th grade year, 2013 was their 5th grade year, 2014 was their 6th grade year, and then 2015 was their 7th grade year. You can see that their does not meet actually increased over the 5 years. Then their meets was going down. It increased at 2014 and then back down in the 2015. And their exceeds was on the rise, but then actually has continued to decrease majorly the last 3 years, 2013, 2014, and 2015. So we actually are seeing a decrease in the exceeds, a decrease in the meets, which means we're going to have an increase in our does not meet. This graphic is comparing our science with the math and the ELA because they have academic coaches. So we're kind of looking and seeing, does the academic coach make a difference in having that and not having it? So once again, the red is does not meet, the yellow is meets, and the green is exceeds. You see that less students are not meeting in math and ELA, which have the academic coach, but then we have a higher percentage in science with no academic coach that does not meet. The meeting section, your math and your ELA, are still higher than your science meets, and they have academic coaches and the science does not. The exceeds is still fairly the same for the science, the math, and the ELA, even though they have academic coaches. So do we think that these academic coaches, make a difference? Do we think that we need a science academic coach? Do we think that that science academic coach would help us decrease this does not meet? And would it be worth it? After reviewing this data, some areas of strength that I saw were that DMS had a growing population each year from the 2011 to 2015, but the data shows that even with the increase in population, the percentage of the meets and exceeds stayed relatively the same except in the 2015 school year. So I think even though we had an increase in students, to keep the same percentage of meeting and exceeding is actually really good because you're getting more students, but you're teaching those students and they're able to meet and exceed on that CRCT. Also, DMS had a higher percentage of the students that meet the proficiency level than the state did for the years 2011 and 2014. So they were outperforming the state in the meet proficiency level. So I think this is another area of strength for Dalton Middle School. A major area of weakness that I saw was in the subgroups and the non-subgroup members. There was over a 30% difference for the disabilities, English proficiency, and economically disadvantaged students compared to all the other students. So I really think that we need to work on finding ways that we can, meet the needs of these subgroups, so we are increasing the percentage of students that are meeting and exceeding in our subgroups, just like our non-subgroups. The largest achievement gap was between the English proficiency students compared to our non-subgroup students at 39.7%. We also saw that 70% of our students taking the test are Hispanic, so if the majority of our students taking the test are Hispanic, and maybe even potentially their English proficiency is not your highest, then we need to figure out what we can do to meet the needs of those students that are Hispanic taking the test, that are, English proficient students, that, meeting the strategies and the skills and the test taking skills, whatever it is that we need to help close that gap. Also, the 7th grade science had less percentage of students at the meets and exceeds proficiency level than the two subjects with academic coaches, math and ELA. So then a question here is, could we have an academic coach? Does that matter? Would it matter? What can we do? And if we can't get an academic coach, then what can we do to kind of simulate an academic coach in that area? So after reviewing the data and looking at the graphics, I want to know what data was the most shocking to you. What are the additional instruction strategies that you believe we can use to help meet the subgroup's needs to help close that achievement gap that we saw in the subgroup versus non-subgroups graphic? And all the data kind of showed that the trend continued for 2011 through 2014, but in 2015, the data seemed to show lower proficiency levels, more students not meeting. Do you think that change from the CRCT to the EOG had an effect on the achievement? If it does, then what do we do? What do we change? How do we meet those instructional needs of our students? Is it the test? Do we teach the test? Is it test-taking skills? Was it because it was the first year? What do we think, if it did have an effect on achievement, what we need to do for the next year? And the next question, the last question I'll leave you with, is where do we go from here? So think about that, take it in, and just think, here's the data, here's the information we're given, where do we go from here? Thank you for your time.